welcome everyone to this episode of Freedom Hub's Working Group. I'm your host, Jeff Cantor, along with my co-host, Charles Froman. We are sponsored by the Marketplace for Health, Wealth, and Freedom, which is found at your-mp.com, and it is absolutely the disruptor's intersection. And today, obviously, is going to see is no exception to that rule. We do run a concurrent show, which is based on the free market in the health world, which is another whole part of the economy that needs to be dealt with. So you'll certainly enjoy this. And again, you do want to visit us at the site. So we've got a nice short way to get there. Let's take a quick gander at it before we dive into today. When you're up on the home page, there's a lot of good information in here and good drop downs and the like, plenty to be added regularly. We do have under the homepage the tab for the webinars, which is today, but let's jump forward a little bit because we have continuing the conversation. And so what happens when you click on that is you end up over here. And what's great about this is after you've heard from our guest, now maybe you want to connect with this person in a more meaningful way, do business with them, help their lobbying efforts, get onto their cause, whatever it may be. So this is your chance to be able to do that. And then the other biggie is under the Freedom tab, Fighting for Our Freedom. When you click on that, these are the issues that are pressing to be aware of that you should act on and, sign up for, and also pay attention to these different organizations that are fighting for our various forms of freedom. So let's dig into where we are for today. So again, if you're on the home page, you click on webinars, boom, you're over on this page, a little info about what we're up to, a breakout on the two guests of the day. We'll come back to that in a second. A breakdown of who's coming up so you can plan ahead to be here for some really great live entertainment. And then also very importantly, the links where these will be posted. So by the end of the week at all of these four platforms, each of these shows will be posted. So today's will be here as an example. If we went to Brighteon, you'll see there's a wealth of, wealth of shows to review from years past. We've been doing this for a long time already. So there's some great stuff to share. Or maybe a favorite going on Rumble. So whatever is your favorite place, we've got it there for you. So let's find out about what's on store for us today. And here's where I'm going to get Charles to jump in here if he's able.
I am, Jeff.
Oh, good. Okay. I wasn't sure.
And welcome, Dan. This is exciting. This is his second time with Freedom Hub. He was with us a year and a half ago or something. Jeff and I, we've had these weekly events for so long that all the exact times kind of mesh with each other. Dan's an important guy in my life and in the life of a lot of people. Back in the early 90s, when I was a congressional staffer, I quickly learned that I was the type of staffer that didn't want to just do what my boss wanted to do, but I wanted to push him to really go after the bigger solutions that would help more people. Unfortunately, politics is usually about the least common denominator. And Dan will tell us how that's a problem that's just plaguing tax policy. Back in the early 90s, when Gingrich took over the government in 94 and kind of forced Clinton to balance the budget and pursue some bigger reforms, there was so much momentum for tax reform. Dan has served on the National Commission on Restructuring, the IRS, and quickly Dan became the leader of the most radical camp, and that was to abolish the income tax. So many right-wing or conservatives were following Dick Armey's call to merely flatten the income tax. Just have a one-page form, you put down your income and pay 10, 15, 20%, and you're done. It's simple, it's appealing, but I think people who learn about the history of taxation learn that I think our income tax in the 1913 time started, someone has a flat tax, and look how long it lasted flat, not very long. Complexity always develops. A sales tax means no more keeping track of your income, no more all-nighters April 14th to get your tax bill in, no more complexity, making most folks pay almost $1,000 every year for a tax accountant to keep themselves out of trouble. Probably no more income tax, no more IRS persecution of dissidents or people unpopular with the dominant party. In fact, that abuse from the IRS is what gave Dan his big name. He testified before Senate Finance, and his testimony apparently led to a taxpayer bill of rights. So he's very well known in the compliance community to get folks out of trouble, which happens a lot with the complexity of the tax code. He's a leader for reformers on what to do with the tax code. And he's back in the news because of Biden. These Democrats, they want to give you freebies and people vote for that, but that has to be paid for. So the IRS is always pressured as part of that equation to go after tax cheats, people evading taxes. And so the IRS is coming after us, and that gets folks paying attention to the matter. And Dan will explain what is going on now with the IRS sharpening its fangs and what to do about it. Jeff, there's our intro.
All right. Well, let's find out what we need to do to salvage our situation. So I'm going to turn off the little screen here. And Dan, I'm going to give you the floor.
Well, okay, Jeff and Charles, it's a pleasure to be here. And Charles is exactly right. We crossed paths in the early 1990s as a result of the work that I was doing with the movement to abolish the Internal Revenue Service and adopt a national retail sales tax. I am completely convinced, I was then, and I am now completely convinced that the Internal Revenue Code that we have now is built on an unsound foundation. And when you've got a house that's built on an unsound foundation, doesn't make any difference how many times you fill the nail holes and you paint the walls, it doesn't fix the problem. The problem is the foundation is crumbling, and if you got a crack in the wall or your doors don't close properly or the windows are starting to break, you can replace all the windows you want. You don't ever fix the problem. And that's what's been going on with our Internal Revenue Code now for as long as I've been paying attention. I've been a tax litigation consultant helping people solve IRS audit and collection problems for over 40 years. I've seen every kind of tax case you can imagine. I've seen a few that you can't imagine, and every single situation well. Let me say this: the tax code is responsible for most of the problems that people have because of lack of understanding. We've got a code now that consists of about 4 million words that were changed more than, get this now, more than 5,900 times just since 2001 alone. That doesn't even include all the stuff that's happened in the last, well, so far in 2021, all the changes we saw in 2020, and doesn't include the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the Trump administration law that took effect in January of 2018. So we've got these massive changes to the Internal Revenue Code, which to me is evidence of the fact that the Internal Revenue Code is unsound foundationally. If you've got something that's sound foundationally, you don't have to change it 5,900 times over a 25-year period, 20-year period of time. There's just no question about that. Now, the code, in my opinion, the code is unsound. It's unsound economically, it's unsound constitutionally, and it's unsound morally. And when you've got a house that's built on an unsound foundation, as I said, you don't fix it by filling cracks and painting walls. You got to bulldoze it. You got to level it. You got to start over again. And this is the mantra that I've had since the early 1990s when I got on board with this fundamental tax reform, a fundamental tax reform movement. You know, the idea of tax reform is long gone. We've had all the tax reform that anybody can stomach. What we need is fundamental tax reform. We got to bulldoze the Internal Revenue Code and start over again. And in my opinion, the only system that's simple, fair, and efficient, the only system that meets constitutional muster, that meets moral muster, as far as I'm concerned, is a national retail sales tax on all consumption goods and services, no exemptions, and a non-progressive tax. In other words, a tax that falls on all citizens in proportion. I'm not saying it should be regressive. It certainly should not be progressive, but it shouldn't be regressive either. It should be proportional, meaning that it falls on all income levels in proportion to their wealth. Rich people or higher income people pay more tax under a sales tax system because they spend more money. Lower income people pay less tax under a sales tax system because they spend less money. That is proportional. It's not regressive. That means it doesn't hit lower income people harder. It's not progressive. It doesn't hit higher income people harder. It falls on all levels in proportion to their income, and that meets the constitutional standard of uniformity and fairness with our tax system. The progressive income tax system we have now is not based on any constitutional principle. It's not based on any economic principle. It's based on the concept of invidious discrimination. And instead of discriminating against somebody because of their racial background or their ethnic background or their sexual orientation, instead we are discriminating against people based on their economic status. And the more money they have, the harder we have to pound them, the harder we have to hit them. That's an immoral system. All right, it's not based on economic needs. It's not based on constitutional requirements. It's certainly not based on any moral proposition. It's based on the idea that because you have more money than somebody else, we have to take it from you. Even though you earn that money lawfully and peacefully, we're going to steal it from you because somehow we think that you shouldn't be entitled to have any more than X dollars. And of course, the X factor is arbitrary. That's the problem. This is the problem with an arbitrary, with a progressive tax system, is its structure is completely arbitrary. As I said, it's certainly not based on any constitutional grounds. It's not based on any economic philosophy. It's based on an arbitrary standard that is imposed by whoever happens to be in power at the time. And with the leftists that are in power right now, what we're seeing is this outright attack on high income people, this outright attack on wealth, specifically for the purposes of advocating the Marxist policy of the abolition of capital, the destruction of capital in the hands of private people, and the redistribution of that capital, not from rich people to poor people. Don't make any mistake about this, friends. This Marxist philosophy is not about redistributing wealth from rich people to poor people. It's about redistributing wealth from the people who own it and produce it into the hands of the government. That's the Marxist model. Abolition of private property, abolition of private capital, and the redistribution of that capital into the hands of the government. And this is where the disconnect is in the minds of the public about these progressive tax systems and these propositions to tax the rich. The leftists have the public believing that it's about raising lower income people up the rungs of the economic ladder. That's not what it's about. It's about destroying private property and redistributing that property to government. That's what it's all about. This is another reason, it's one more reason why it's just so important to abolish this tax system. But I came to the conclusion in the 1990s, Charles, that after I spent so much time with Congress and so much time with folks like you, congressional aides, and some of these think tanks. I worked with Heritage, and I worked with Cato, and I worked with the Foundation for Economic Education, and working with the Heartland Foundation on a regular basis. So I've worked with these public policy research institutes, and I came to the conclusion that Congress is never going to do the right thing for the right reason, especially when it comes to tax policy. What they're going to do is they're going to be forced to do the right thing when everything else has failed. And in my mind, that failure would be marked by the collapse of the Internal Revenue Service. And we're seeing that happen right before our eyes. The Internal Revenue Service is collapsing under its own weight. They're collapsing because of the sheer volume of data that they're asked to process and administer every year. We got about 152 million individual tax returns filed every single year. We got another 100 million business tax returns. We got 3.5 billion. That's not million, it's billion information returns that are filed with the IRS every year. W-2s, 1099s, K-1s, all these information returns that are produced by private industry, by private businesses, and filed with the government on a yearly basis. It amounts to domestic spying of American citizens on American citizens, right? So the government's got us spying on each other to the tune of 3.5 billion information returns every year. And that's not enough. The Biden administration is proposing even more information return filing and processing. So it's an ongoing thing. So we've in addition to that, we've got now what is considered to be significant mission creep. That is to say, where the Congress is assigning tasks to the Internal Revenue Service to perform that their fundamental job description does not involve. All right. So, for example, you've got the Affordable Care Act. The Congress heaped all kinds of responsibilities on the Internal Revenue Service to enforce and administer the Affordable Care Act. Well, that's not the IRS's job. Their job is to collect taxes, not administer welfare programs. You got all these refundable tax credits that are in the Internal Revenue Code. There's 6 or 7 of them. And the most recognizable one for most folks that aren't tax professionals is the earned income tax credit. This is the tax credit that effectively, and it's refundable, meaning that you can get more money back from the government than you paid in the first place. All right. So if you qualify, you can actually get a refund of money that you never even put in. Right, so it's not a refund at all. What it is welfare. The Earned Income Tax Credit is a welfare program imposed by the federal government, or I should say created by the federal government, and enforced and administered by the Internal Revenue Service. That's what this refundable credit is. Now we see another leg of refundable tax credits that were added by the American Rescue Plan Act, the name that I just abhor spitting out, the American Rescue Plan Act, which was passed by Congress here just last March, just a couple of months ago, and the child tax credit now under that act is not only refundable, but it's been expanded significantly and turned into an advanced payment system. All right, we saw that last year with the stimulus payments. We got 2 stimulus payments, one last year and then one right at the beginning in December, and then another one in January. These stimulus payments are going to be made permanent in the Internal Revenue Code under the umbrella of the child tax credit. And this is a way for the federal government to create a system of universal income, universal basic income. How could that ever happen? You ask yourself. Some of these leftists were campaigning for that during the presidential election last year. Who's ever going to go along with universal basic income, this welfare check mailed out by the federal government every month to certain qualifying families? Well, guess what, friends? We have it right now already in the form of the child tax credit. And so you're going to see these checks starting to go out in June. And let's see, 6 months worth of checks. So starting in July, they'll go out every single month, and you'll get half your child tax credit in the form of a check from the government over that 6-month period of time. The other half of the credit is going to show up on your 2021 tax return when you file that in April of 2022. But again, that's just the beginning of it. The Biden administration is now pushing to make that permanent, so we have an effective system of universal basic income, a endless stream of welfare payments paid out by the federal government, administered and enforced by the Internal Revenue Service. This is how far we've come, guys, and it's only getting worse. So there's the start of the process, right? Just rang the bell, guys. So where do we go from here?
It's the perfect question, is where do we go from here, Amazing. So what do you think? How can they push this through? I mean, is there going to be no resistance to any of this, or they're just going to drive it through reconciliation, or?
Well, it's already been pushed through. As I said, the fundamental statute is already on the books. They call it the child tax credit. So it's already been passed as a result, as a part of the American Rescue Plan Act, and the Biden administration through the Treasury Department, Janet Yellen, is pushing to make it permanent, and I believe they're going to make it permanent. They hold the House, they hold the Senate, they hold the White House. There's nothing stopping them from making this thing permanent, and it's all going to be done under the guise of helping the low income working citizen, helping those folks that have are struggling so much, and of course under the umbrella of COVID relief. Jeff and Charles, I mean, anything is possible. I mean, we've seen things happen. I know I have seen things happen in the last 14 months that I never could have predicted. I'll tell you, I never, ever would have imagined in my lifetime the federal government setting up a system of forgivable loans where they just gave out tens of billions of dollars in forgivable loans because of this healthcare issue, because of the virus issue. I don't know. Did any of you guys see this coming? I sure didn't.
And that, especially with the thought of how is any of this to ultimately get paid for?
Well, and nobody's even asking that question.
No, that's, I mean, that was like the most.
The question has never once come up in this discussion. In my newsletter last year, I forget what month it was, I did an analysis of what the cost has been up to this point, and they're just getting started. We've got about $6 trillion worth of spending last year on these various programs. The American Rescue Plan Act is another 1.2 trillion, and the American Families, what do they call that? American Families, I think it's the American Family Plan, which is on the table right now in Congress. This is the one that will make the child tax credit permanent. It's called the American Family Plan. That's another $2 trillion. And they're just getting started here. They got 3 more years of this. It depends what happens with the midterm elections, but they got at least another year and a half of this before there might be an upset in the structure of Congress. But who knows what that's going to look like either. We'll just have to wait and see. There, as far as I can see, there's nothing to stop them.
Let's say that things do switch in the other direction at the midterms. What then? Can some of this stuff be undone, or are they putting stuff in that's going to be near impossible to dislodge?
Well, first of all, you need the president to undo anything, right? I mean, you can have both houses of Congress pass a specific piece of legislation that the president vetoes, and unless the legislative function has veto override votes, which who knows whether that'll be the case, but unless they do, the president vetoes it, so that's the end of it. So I'm just not that optimistic. Now, here's the other reality. Once these things are in law, and Charles, you can speak to this probably better than I can. Once these things are in law, they're almost impossible to get rid of. Look at Obamacare. President Trump got elected on the proposition of, among other things, one of the key things that got him into office, in my opinion, is his promise to abolish Obamacare. We didn't get it abolished. He didn't come close to getting it abolished. All he got was the penalty repealed. The penalty for not having the insurance was repealed with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. But even that was temporary, and it didn't, even though the act took effect in 2018, the penalty provision, a repeal of the penalty provision, the suspension, it's not a repeal, the suspension of the penalty provision didn't kick in until 2019, and all of that expires in 2025 anyway. And then plus the fact that Congress has promised to repeal all of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and the American Families Act is going to do most of that. So, once these things are in place, these giveaway programs are in place, it's almost impossible to get rid of them. And all they ever do is grow. Think all the way back. And I don't know how old you guys are and how long you've been paying attention to this, but I think all the way back to the early 1980s, when everybody was in an uproar over the solvency and future of the Social Security system. And there was this great turmoil over whether the Social Security system was going to go broke or not. And there was a law that was passed in 1980, 1981 or 1982 called the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act, which was neither equitable nor responsible, but it was passed specifically for the purposes of funding Social Security. So they passed this massive tax increase at that time to fund Social Security. There was a report by National Commission on Social Security, on Entitlements and Tax Reform was called. National Commission on Entitlements and Tax Reform that came out at the end of the 1980s that addressed the fiscal future of the Social Security program. And they basically made the statement, I'm paraphrasing now, I don't have the report in front of me, it's been years, but they basically made the statement that our system of, our primary system of federal social benefits that come through Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, they were unsustainable, and that these systems were going to be broke by the 2030, 2040, somewhere in there, unless something has changed. Well, nobody paid any attention to that stuff. And not only have these things not been reformed in any meaningful way, more benefits are being granted. And the Medicare program, now Medicare for All, and reducing Medicare age eligibility from 65 to 60 years of age, they're going in the wrong direction, guys. They're going in absolutely the wrong direction, and nobody, and I mean nobody, is asking the question, how do you pay for this stuff? Well, the short-term answer appears to be you just print more money to pay for it. You just print more money. Well, we're seeing the results of that. You know, construction material has quadrupled in the last year. Not all attributable to inflation, certainly. The COVID issues have had a lot to do with that, but the fact is they've tripled. Gas prices are up $1.50 a gallon. I don't have to tell you what's going on with real estate in the United States right now, and that's great if you're a buyer and or a seller rather, and you want to downsize your house. But if you're a buyer, like, you know, how do young families out there afford these houses that are going crazy? And I'm telling you, inside of a year, if this continues, within, let's just say, I'll be conservative and say within 2 years, a loaf of bread is going to cost $18. This is where we're headed.
You know, it is pretty amazing. And
Jeff?
Yes.
Charlie here before I head out.
I'll go.
A quick change of topic here on healthcare. You mentioned Obamacare. One of the things I thought would be really totally huge from replacing income taxation with sales taxation, Dan, would be the impact on healthcare. If employers can't deduct benefits given to employees, do we have the wonderful result of individualization of healthcare, number one? And number two, with the loss of income tax deductibility for health savings accounts, lessen the value of savings accounts for out of pocket? Do you follow my line of thinking there?
Yeah, I follow your line of thinking. First of all, as far as privatizing the market or creating demand for more products in the marketplace, I don't think there's any doubt that would arise. But I'll tell you this: I do not believe that employers will drop employer-provided health care in most cases just because there's no tax deductibility for the expense. And the reason I say that is because, and this is more true now than it's ever been. And I maintained this proposition 15, 20 years ago. And if it was true then, it's even more true now. Employers, companies are in a dogfight for talent. All right. It is difficult to get qualified people to step up and work without the right compensation plan. So companies are having to offer more money. They're having to offer more benefits. They're having to offer more time off. They're having to do things that they might not otherwise have had to do 20 or 25 years ago. This is a situation where they need to sweeten the pot to get qualified workers. And that, and top on the list for most people is healthcare. I want some healthcare benefits. I want this, whether it's a health savings account or an employer-sponsored insurance plan, whatever it may be. I don't think those, my opinion, they will not go away just because the deduction does. I mean, what is your view, Charles?
Well, I was going to say, I think you has a lot to say there, but with this idea of the ICRA, where you just get the money to the employees so they can buy whatever they want. I think maybe the idea of the group company plan might have a bit of a limited lifespan because most people don't like it. It's only good for one person out of the 10 that are on it, and the rest hate the hell out of it. So they'd rather get the money and make their own choice. They're locked in at thinking insurance comes with work, though. I think we're stuck with that paradigm.
Well, yeah, and I tend to agree with you. And I don't know anything about group insurance policies, right? I got a small company here, 5 employees. I don't know anything about that stuff, and it's certainly not my area of expertise, and I'm not going to guess. But I would agree that if people have a choice, that they're gonna want to exercise their own discretion rather than being stuffed in some cubbyhole that some either company executive or insurance executive or a combination of the two have decided that this one-size-fits-all plan is good for all 50 of our employees, when, as you said, it might only work for 5 or 10 of them.
Right, exactly. Dr. Campbell, I see your hands up.
Hey, yeah, terrific presentation. I'm glad I got to attend this. Just a couple things that stand out. A comment from the D side and a comment from the R side. From the D side, speaking to employee provided health insurance, my Democrat friends have told me that they think the only thing that has kept Obamacare from becoming Medicare for all is that workers like their insurance and employers like to provide insurance. In other words, as a competitive edge over their other companies. And I think that's so true now. As expensive as it is, companies are trying to provide insurance for. And so,
there's no question they need to sweeten the pot to get qualified people in the door.
yeah, and I think if we got rid of it, I think we would have Medicare for all. It would be much more likely, which is not something that I like. As I say, if you think healthcare is expensive now, wait till it's free.
Yep, exactly right.
The other thing from the Republican side, and I had the privilege of helping President Trump a lot with his healthcare policy, and he called us, our group, in February. He said, not the biggest healthcare disappointment, but his biggest disappointment of his 4 years in office was not repealing Obamacare. And he put it in terms of it was the biggest transfer of wealth from middle-class Americans to corporations ever in the history of the American government. So that, the insurance companies, all the medical device, and of course the health systems, the giant health system made out like bandits. So interesting way to look at it. He looked at it purely, I look at it from a healthcare perspective because I'm a doctor, but he looked at it purely from an economic, financial flow. But, a question now.
Robert, excuse me, and let me interrupt Dr. Campbell and ask this question. Since you had the inside track, and I never did with the Trump administration, everything I saw was from the outside looking in.
Yeah.
Why didn't they get it repealed?
Well, Trump wanted it. They would say Paul Ryan initially, and then John McCain. But he had two key advisors who really were in his ear saying, like a lot of Republicans are advised, run away from healthcare, run away from healthcare. And we're trying to get the Republican Study Committee and anyone who wants to win a Republican contest against a Democrat, you have to have a story on healthcare. It can't just be, I'm going to get rid of Obamacare, I'm going to get rid of stuff. It has to be, personally, I think, a free market alternative to Obamacare. So the free market will provide lower cost, higher quality. But you have to be able to say that on a stump really quickly. Trump could never do that. He could never do that. He could never speak to it. But I'm always amazed, and this is with my libertarian friends here on the line. How do you think we've gotten to the point where, the Democratic Party has become essentially as close to socialists or Marxists as ever in my lifetime, and we just don't seem to have the ability to bring that back to the middle. And I'm wondering, I'm hoping the libertarians can save us from Marxism. Is there any hope?
Well, if you're asking me, I don't know what the libertarians would say about that. I will tell you this. I think the biggest problem we have along those lines is the fact that we've got 2, probably 3 generations of kids. Certainly, there's no question the majority of our citizens under the age of 30, and the numbers are upwards of 70%, believe that socialism is a better idea than capitalism, and is more equitable, and is more favorable to low income people than capitalism is, and that capitalism is this abusive system that takes advantage of them. And there's only one source of that information, and that's the public schools. So until we deal with the question of what's coming out of these public schools, we're never going to fix the political problems that grow from it.
No, it's two-pronged actually, and Charles, I don't know if you've seen or can chime in, but you're right about that. It's all, and like even Milton Friedman figured out after all of his years that at the end of his life, he started to focus on schools because it became the essence of where the problem started. But then also the ballot. And so I just know from having been involved with the Libertarians for umpteen years, what successes that they've garnered at the ballot box in terms of getting ballot access laws changed, because that's the whole hurdle right there. Because if it's a level playing field at the ballot, they fare very well at the election box. But you can't get on the ballot, so you don't get to get voted for. But in the
Jeff?
last half a dozen years, they've really improved ballot capabilities all over the place. So that's a great indicator. And then obviously this COVID's actually worked to improve homeschooling and school choice and everything else too. And a lot of backlash with Black Lives Matter, where a lot of blacks said, wait a minute, you're against charter schools? Though that's good for the black community.
Right.
So they're shooting themselves a little. Go ahead, Charles.
Well,
I know you wanted to kick in.
Yeah, I had a question here. A couple questions. One, what do we do if Biden refunds the IRS persecution of dissidents like happened under Obama? Number one. And number two, maybe go back to the ivory tower here. And
let me stop you right there, because I want to address that first. In I believe it was January the 15th, might have even been before that, but it was definitely after the Capitol, what they're calling the Capitol riots, the quote unquote insurrection, right? The senator from and I'm blocking on his name right now, the senator from the radical leftist senator from Oregon, his name will come to me. Just never mind.
Wyden.
Say again.
Ron Wyden.
Wyden wrote a letter to the Commissioner of Internal Revenue imploring the Commissioner of Internal Revenue to use the power of the Internal Revenue Service to attack right-wing conservative 501c3 organizations, because it was Wyden's opinion that quote-unquote dark money was used to fund the quote-unquote insurrection, and it was flowing from these conservative, highly conservative 501c3 groups. And Wyden expressed to the commissioner that it was an outrage that these 501c3 organizations were using tax-exempt money to fund essentially the overthrow of the United States government. Now, this is not much hyperbole in my explanation here. Right? This is very, very close to what Wyden was saying, word for word, in his letter to the commissioner. And I wrote a responsive op-ed on that was published. I forget who did it, if it was National Review or somebody, on Wyden's attack. The answer, Charles, is they're not waiting for any specific authorization to have the IRS go after these organizations. They've already started the process of turning the IRS loose on the so-called dissidents. It's already in process.
Sad to see is right. Okay. Did you have a follow-up with that one, Charles? I thought you said a
Well, what do we do about it? I'm calling you for protection from that persecution, number one. And the follow-up is just to go back to the flattening of the income tax debate versus the sales tax. Just explain why the flat tax is insufficient in terms of a reform. So first, how do we defend ourselves against the IRS attack? And number two, why the flat tax is insufficient for reform.
Well, let's start working backwards. Just for example, a flat tax would not address any of these political issues that we've just discussed. That is to say, turning the IRS loose on political dissidents. Whoever happens to be in power has political enemies. And as long as we've got an income tax, and as long as we've got Section 501c3 and C4 and all the rest of these C, whatever the subsection is, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's like 19 of them. As long as we got all that, you've got the power, you've got the potential for the IRS to abuse its power by attacking those organizations. So none of that goes away. The other problem with the income tax is it will address none of the problems that businesses face. 2/3 of all of the delinquencies, the tax delinquencies in America, are businesses. And the vast majority of those are small businesses, businesses with fewer than 50 employees. And the number one problem that businesses have with tax compliance is in the area of trust fund tax compliance. By that, I'm talking about the money that's withheld from the paychecks of their employees, and which they then are responsible, the employer is then responsible to pay that over to the IRS. So when you have a business with employees, there are 4 components of the trust fund, of the employment tax that you bear responsibility for. The first two components are the withheld income taxes from the employees. The second component is the withheld Social Security taxes and Medicare taxes from the employees. The third component is matching Social Security, right? For every dollar your employee pays in Social Security taxes, you as the employer have to match that up to a cap about $130,000 or $40,000, about $140,000 right now. And then the fourth component is the employer's unemployment tax obligation. Those four separate burdens constitute the totality of what we call the employment tax. The single biggest problem that businesses have with tax law compliance is in this area of employment taxes. All right, now here is how important this is. About 60% of every dollar the IRS collects is not collected by the IRS. 60% of every dollar collected is collected by employers through this withholding system and paid into the IRS. No flat tax system is going to solve that problem. Employers are responsible for filing 5 employment tax returns every single year, 4 941 forms, a 940, and then add to that all the W-2s and the W-3s that have to be filed to report to the IRS and to the Social Security Administration all of the earnings for those employees. All right. So this is where we get 100 million employment tax returns filed every year. Business tax returns, employment tax returns. A flat tax system doesn't solve any of that. 2/3 of all of the problems let me rephrase that and say 2/3 of all the penalties that are issued against individuals and 2/3 of all the penalties assessed by the IRS are issued against businesses. And most of those penalties are in this area of employment taxes. A flat tax system doesn't fix any of that. All right, so the biggest problem with the flat tax system is it doesn't address any of the compliance problems. Now, is it going to make filing a little easier for certain number of individual taxpayers? Yeah, it'll help some individual taxpayers, but let's understand this. 70%, almost 70% of every tax return filed in America today is already a flat tax return. And what I mean by that is it's a short form, a 1040A. And all it does is report your income, your name, your address, your dependents, your income, you got no deductions, and here's your tax liability. It's a flat tax return. For all practical purposes, it's a so-called Dick Armey postcard return. That's what, okay, so 70% of the people are already doing that. But now we still have the problem of paying the taxes. And what about the other 30% who file the complicated tax returns? The 1040 with the Schedule A and the Schedule D and the Schedule E and the Schedule WXYZ, all the alphabet soup schedules that go along with it. That the flat tax system doesn't, it might address some of that. But the other thing that the flat tax system doesn't address is the compliance. That is to say, paying the tax. You still have to pay your taxes, right? And we still got the Internal Revenue Service that's funded to the tune of $12 billion. Well, it's $11 billion right now. If the Biden administration has its way, it's going to be another $1.2 billion. So north of $12 billion what the IRS will be funded. And that's all about collection enforcement, guys. That's all about audit and collection enforcement. That's what it is. It's all about squeezing people to get the money. The flat tax doesn't fix any of that because you still got to pay the doggone taxes. All right. And when people fall short, when they don't have the money, now the IRS is turned loose on them. And with a sales tax system, all of that goes away. All of it goes away, including the problems with not having the money to pay, because when you purchase a product or service at retail in the marketplace, you pay the tax at the point of sale. So you don't have any of those problems with the sales tax system that you have with the income tax. All of the enforcement administrative problems that we're seeing with the Internal Revenue Service and the Internal Revenue Code, all of it will go away. Under a flat tax system, virtually none of it goes away. And not even the audits go away, because here's something you got to understand. Because people have said to me 1,000 times, well, Dan, if we got a flat tax system, what's there to audit? Well, I'll tell you what there is no audit. Income. You can audit the income on the tax return. According to the Internal Revenue Service's literature on enforcement, all right, the vast majority of cheating comes in the form of not bogus tax deductions, but underreported income. And in fact, in my latest article, as published by National Review, it's called Three False Narratives Being Used in the IRS Push for Funding. It's on National Review. You can go to nationalreviewonline.com and you can put in my name and this article will come up. Three false narratives being used in the IRS funding push. One of the things that they're talking about in their research is this idea that rich people are underpaying their taxes by not reporting all of their income. All right, so this is what the flat tax system will not cure, whereas a sales tax system will abolish it completely. So the bottom line, Charles, is the flat tax affords only a very, very narrow window of resolution to a very, very narrow scope of problems, whereas the sales tax system abolishes all of this stuff.
So it begs the question, how do we start to make that happen? It's been floating for a zillion years, but obviously it's not on anyone's radar. How do we as individuals kind of force the agenda?
It's not on anyone's radar, Jeff. How do we force the, you're exactly right. How do we force the issue? The fact of the matter is that the whole argument got trumped. It really got Clinton. It didn't get trumped. It got Clinton by President Clinton in 1996, 97 with the National Commission on Restructuring the IRS and the IRS Restructuring and Reform Act, which took all the wind, all the wind out of the flat tax sales tax debate, the fundamental tax reform debate, because the idea was, well, we reformed the IRS and we fixed all this abuse and we fixed all this, we fixed all of these problems with the IRS, so we can go along about our business now. So I've rethought this whole thing, Jeff, and the answer to the question is this: we have to pick the income tax off. All right, we have to pick off the income tax one state at a time. We got 5 or 6 states out there with no income tax: Alaska, Nevada, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, state of Washington. All right, so there's all of these states, with the exception of possible exception of state of Washington because of what's happened in 2020. But the fact of the matter is that economically, states without an income tax always outperform economically outperform states with an income tax. And so what we got to do is pick the income tax off one state at a time. We got to make it a state project. All right, we got to get Wisconsin to abolish its income tax. We got to get Illinois to abolish its income tax. Indiana, Minnesota, go down the list of all. In fact, there's a fight right now in the state of Oklahoma, and I've been providing some intellectual ammunition to the folks down there. They're pushing to abolish their state income tax. If we can get a movement of states to, and this is where our libertarian friends will help tremendously, if we can get a movement of the states to abolish their state income taxes, I think that will build the momentum to get Congress to act. It's never going to happen the other way around, in my opinion.
No, I can agree with that one. That makes a lot of sense. Is there like a little list of states that are kind of favorable, leaning, hard to make happen now?
I don't have a list off the top of my head, but you can go to heartland.org. The Heartland Institute outside of Chicago does a great deal of work on state issues. In fact, that's their claim to fame, is working on state policy issues. And in fact, you can go to the Heartland's website, heartland.org, and get, I produced a paper for them specifically for this purpose. It's called the 10 Principles of Federal Tax Policy. And this is part of the legislative principles series that Heartland started working on 10 years ago. And actually that turned into a book published by Heartland called The Patriot's Toolbox. And the Patriot's Toolbox has got all of the legislative policy papers in it, including mine. And this is the intellectual ammunition that's been provided to the states to push this movement. They used it in Montana. They're using it in Oklahoma. There are a couple other places they used it. And so that would be the place to go to find out, where the battlegrounds are, and to get the ammunition to join the battle, so to speak.
Is there any organization that's sort of leading the charge, like Heartland or somebody like that? Not necessarily in all the states, but at least in a pocket of them?
Well, Heartland's a public policy research institute, so they can't lead any charge for changes to legislation. But I do believe they have links on their site for organizations that are involved.
That are working on it. Yeah, because that looks like it's going to be the way to go. Because if they start like any domino thing, enough of these states start to do it, and everyone can readily see that they're performing better. Hello. And then it's easy to address.
Right.
And then when the states roll, then obviously the national's a lot easier.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I testified before the Minnesota Senate Committee on Finance. What was it, a year ago? We had a couple of legislators, probably more like 2 years ago, we had a couple of legislators in Minnesota that were really on board with this idea. And so we had a couple of hearings that I testified at and started, making noise. Unfortunately, in this leftist state, it didn't go anywhere, but we're there making noise. That's the thing. You got to start making noise where you can.
Yep, exactly. And then just not be fearful, or assume like the usual, well, somebody else is going to take care of it. I don't need to bother. It takes all of us to get bothered finally.
Yeah, it does. And one thing people need to understand, Jeff, when you're looking at this stuff, it seems so overwhelming. How can I, as one person, make a difference? Well, the fact of the matter is no one person can do everything, but every person can do something. And that's all you need to do is something. Just figure out what your gifts and talents and skills are and bring those to bear in that one little area. That's all you need to do, is do what you are capable of. And then you're not responsible for the outcome. Ultimately, God's responsible for the outcome. You just got to use the talents that you've been given to try to move the runners around the bases. That's all you can do.
No, and truthfully, it's been proven now that it's always just a single person or two that can make things happen since the invention of Twitter. That's whiny voice, and they'll change whole corporate structures and stuff. So it just goes to show. And really, it was very interesting. We had on the other show a group of moms, and they were 3 friends, and they were about making notification on vaccines. And the 3 of them were able to make like the whole state shift around. 3 people, and they were all just basically one, because they just delegated this different responsibilities to do one thing, and they were powerful. So that's really the key advice of today, is it comes down to each of us, which of course most people are like, darn it, can't I just pay somebody else? Or why does it have to be me? But no, it takes everybody to do it. So, but Dan, that was a fantastic excursion today. I've got closing out your site up here, taxhelponline.com, for people that want to check it out. And again, we will be posting it to the following on the, continuing the conversation, I should say. So we'll have a chance to connect with you later on too. So Dan, this was great. And thanks for today.
It's my pleasure, guys. Just call me anytime. I'm happy to do it.